Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the legislation before us today has come following a lot of consideration, as we heard from the Honourable Member for St. Peter. It's come following a lot of consideration, a lot of consultation, and a lot of, quite frankly, a lot of hard work. What was presented in the ministerial statement by the Honourable Member, as well as in his lead-off of the debate, these are measures and decisions, I assume, that by Cabinet were not taken lightly. They came as the result of a lot of modelling, a lot of discussion, and a real concern about the principles that guide us in taking care of each other. The principles that guide us in taking care of each other. When I say taking care of each other, I don't mean me taking care of the Honourable Member for St. George North, or me taking care of the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central. I'm talking about across generations. We are concerned with making sure that we have the wherewithal to protect people alive today and people who are not yet alive. Everything that we do in this honourable place has to be concerned not just with equity among people who currently exist, equity between people and planet, and equity between generations. That's what we're doing here. So when we think about the measures that the Honourable Member announced, I entreat us not just to think about what that means for me. What does it mean for the children that I dropped to camp this morning? And what does it mean for the children that they will have? I start there because I want to make it clear that the work that is being done here, the decisions that have been taken by this Cabinet here, are not convenient decisions. When I was first starting to be trained in economics and development, there was a certain part of what we learned, what we were made to do, that is known as political economy. Political economy is the study of how political decisions impact economic decisions and vice versa. And one of the things I used to read in my textbooks all the time and in the articles that we were made to read was about the notion that politicians take decisions that will ensure their own survival. That is really at the basis of the discussion on this whole business of political economy. There's this notion that we have to protect against this survival instinct of politicians. Politicians are thinking about, or lawmakers, legislators, policymakers, are thinking about only what will get me past the next election cycle, making decisions only for that purpose. And it always bothered me. At that time, I did not imagine that I would be in political service. But the notion always bothered me. Because I thought, surely there are political actors, surely there are legislators and policymakers who care about what happens to people and are not just looking to protect their own well-being. Sorry, this may be a controversial thing to say, but if the group of women and men in here, in this chamber and in the other place, were only concerned about their own survival politically, perhaps we would not be debating this legislation. If the women and men in here, if the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honourable Prime Minister, the member who is leading this debate, and the rest of the members of the front bench, and all of us, were only concerned with keeping people warm and happy, notwithstanding the consequences, with keeping people warm and happy today, so that we could ensure that we make it past the next election cycle, we would do nothing about pension reform or about the sustainability of the NIS. These are hard decisions, and I am glad to be part of a political generation, because it's not just about this government, sir. I am glad to be part of a political generation that is setting aside its own self-interest in the interest of the people of Barbados and future generations, because that is what we are doing in here today. Sir, the National Insurance Scheme, the National Insurance Fund, needs attention today. It cannot simply be a case of saying, well, we have enough to get us to this next point, because we may not find that the people who come to occupy this place in 10 years or in 20 years have the courage to take these hard decisions. This group in here has the courage to do it. And I really think that we have to see it from that perspective. The NIS needs attention today, sir, for many of the reasons that you heard from the Honourable Member for St. Peter. And I won't attempt to go over them, but we do know that we have demographic challenges. And what do I mean by that? That we have a situation where people are living longer, which means that they will require benefits for a longer period. And we have a declining base of contributors, so fewer people who are paying in to be able to allow us to take care of those people who are living longer. This is a feature of most societies and most countries in the world. And in fact, this is a feature of most systems that are structured like our national insurance scheme is structured. Sir, within a span of 22 years, between 1995 and 2018, 78 countries in the world increased the contribution rate of their national insurance systems. 78 countries increased the contribution rate. 55 countries had to increase the retirement age. 61 countries adjusted their benefits formula and cut or froze old age pension. Grenada, closer to home now, is in the middle of reforming their national insurance scheme. Last week, the Minister of Finance in St. Vincent and the Grenadines called NIS reform in that territory an urgent and unavoidable imperative. The United Kingdom has also recently been in discussions about their own pension system and did not increase their retirement age, not because they did not realize that it would be necessary, but what they did, conveniently for them, politically expediently for them, was that they looked at their COVID deaths recently and used those figures to be able to adjust their life expectancy numbers and therefore collifox their setting of the retirement age. So in other words, they're able to justify not moving the retirement age on the basis of a newly adjusted life expectancy that is offset by the outlier of the high level of COVID mortality. That's what they did, because they, I dare say, are perhaps a little less courageous and a little bit more afraid of doing something that seems uncomfortable or painful in the short term but that is absolutely necessary for the survival of the country and its future generations. Ireland, similarly, was called to do something similar because their life expectancy is increasing. They chose not to do it. Arguably, out of political fear. It is an understandable fear. But I wonder what is worse. Is it worse to preserve the fear and the risk for those who will come after us? Sir, I have friends who asked me in 2016, when I started the process of offering myself a political service, why on earth would you do that? Why would you do that? Why would you put yourself in the firing line or the chopping block, however you want to call it? And I said to them, because my back is broad. Because I happen to know that I have the courage. And I don't expect everybody to have the same courage. So let me go forward on behalf of others who do not have the same courage. And it is not to boast, because courage doesn't mean that you don't get frightened. Courage means that you just do it anyway. And that is what is happening in this chamber today. And I dwell on this point because I want us to understand that these are not decisions that we take lightly. And I also think that we have to understand what the National Insurance Fund and the National Insurance System delivers to Barbadians, and what we stand to risk, the protection, the social safety net that we put at risk if we do not preserve it. The National Insurance Fund benefits include short-term benefits like sickness benefit, maternity benefit, soon we are told by the honorable member for St. Peter, soon paternity benefit, funeral benefit. It also includes employment injury benefit. That is injury benefit, medical expenses, traveling expenses, disablement benefit, death benefit. The long-term benefits that are covered under the fund: old age contributory pension, invalidity pension, which I hope we soon start to call disability pension, because this word invalidity is perhaps a bit outdated, and survivors pension. The suite of benefits offered by Barbados' National Insurance Fund is among the widest ranging globally. Barbados was one of the leaders in establishing this kind of a system. And because of its age, the amount of time that it has been in operation offering benefits to Barbadians is a part of the reason we are here today. Because a system such as this front loads contributions. So when it first starts out, you have more that you're getting paid in, and because of its history, you have fewer people that you're paying out to cover. But invariably, a system that is designed like this, and I have friends who are economists who have not very flattering language for the system. The national insurance system as it is set up, because it means that you are having to crowd in contributions today to pay for people who have already retired. So there are those who believe that perhaps it is time to completely unpack what we understand as this common approach to national insurance schemes, and to see whether there's another way that we can deliver these benefits, simply because of the demographic changes that are happening all over the world. So, sir, I want to take the opportunity then to talk about how the NIS works, so people understand that it is not that you are paying money into a bank account and leaving it there, and then when you age out of work, that money is there for you. That is not the way the system works. Sir, national insurance schemes in Barbados and much of the Caribbean and many parts of the world were designed to be partially funded systems. So it means that in the early years, contributions exceeded expenditure, and the surpluses that you got at that time were invested. When expenditure exceeds the income that is invested, then the assets that you have to fill that gap, as we heard from the honorable member. So social insurance systems are usually designed on a principle of solidarity and pooled funding. I pause here because I want people to understand something else. National insurance systems are not private pensions. They're not set up to operate like private pensions. They cannot be individualized. So for those of us who are saying, look, let me keep my money, let me hold my money and put it somewhere else, if you do that, the old lady that you go to the shop for up the road will not get a pension. Your aunt will not get a pension. So by definition, they can't be individualized, otherwise they will collapse for everyone. They're built on pooled funding. So if you want others, and we really have to think about this. I said in this honorable place before that we keep saying this is who we are, but really we need to start asking ourselves, who is it that we want to be? Do we want to be people who just want to keep our money in our pocket and say, not me, I'm not in that? Or do we want to make sure that we are able to take care, not just of other people, but of our own children in the future when we are gone? So it means, sir, that contributions that are paid in today on behalf of an employee, let's say that employee's name is Lydia, don't accumulate in an individual fund for Lydia to draw down from when she retires or when she qualifies for a benefit. In a pure pay-as-you-go system, contributions paid in today on behalf of Lydia are used today to provide benefits to those who are already in retirement. And I felt it was necessary to say that because I want us to understand that it is not possible to opt out. And I think Barbadians believe that. Why? When we looked at the survey responses, 78% of survey respondents, 78% of survey respondents thought that the NIS was important to the well-being of the country and of Barbadians and wanted to keep it. I want us to understand that because I want us to appreciate that notwithstanding some of the voices of dissent that we will hear invariably over the next few hours and days, Barbadians overwhelmingly understand why this scheme is important and want us to keep it in place. Sir, in 2018, when we came to political service, we did a similar survey. Why? Because let it not be said that we are in here doing as we like. Let it not be said that we went to sleep last night and had a dream and woke up and decided to change a benefit or to move a retirement age. What is happening here is the best outcome, the best reimagined design based on what Barbadians have said that they want. Just like how Barbadians and the Social Partnership agreed that they wanted to preserve the value of the Barbados dollar in June of 2018. Similarly, Barbadians have said, look, I need this national insurance scheme. We get the value from this national insurance scheme. During COVID, when I was self-employed and I didn't know what would happen, and the government at the time put together this business interruption benefit that was administered through the NIS, that had to pull out every stock available and some that were not even so readily available to be able to pay out benefits. Barbadians have realized that this is something that they need. But sir, the reason the NIS needs attention today is something else that I have to come to. It is to say that the structure of the population is the reason. It is not because governments have been reckless with investments of the fund. I know that that is the narrative. And I would say that the outlier, the anomaly, NIS has existed since 1967. And it is only in the previous 10 years, before 2018, that we saw this over-reliance on borrowing from the NIS beyond what was stated in the investment policy. That over-reliance on borrowing from the National Insurance Fund meant that when the debt restructuring became necessary, the fund was hard hit. The fund was overexposed to government securities. Those investment decisions taken at that time were the reason that we saw the NIS affected as it was from the debt restructuring. It was not the debt restructuring, because if the debt restructuring had taken place and the NIS had not been overexposed in the way that it was outside of the parameters and against the guidelines of the investment policy, then it would not have been hit as hard. But further to that, the savings that would have been made, or if that the NIS had not been as hard hit or as affected as it was by the debt restructuring, that would have given us 3 to 4 years time. That would have bought us 3 or 4 years only. It would not have really been any sustainable or sustained way of saving the fund. You know, it is common wisdom that a government should not, a state should not expose a system of social insurance like the NIS to the risk of overborrowing. That is common guidance. That is public finance 101. So, and it is for the very reason that if there comes a time when you have to take action on the debt, then that is going to be one of the first things to be hit. I want to say that I don't want us to get distracted or confused about the reason we have to take action on this national insurance scheme. The reason we have to take action on the national insurance scheme has to do with the fact that we do not have enough people paying into the system today to cover the benefits. That is the reason. Is there space to make sure that investment policy always lines up and that there are not others who will do what was just done and in the future opt to make bad investment decisions? Yes, there's lots of space, and you heard it from the Honourable Member for St. Peter today. And I'll come in a moment to some of the mechanisms, or one of the mechanisms, that tries to prevent that from happening. I'm not saying to Barbadians that it is wrong to be concerned about what happens to the fund. It is perfectly right and in order to be concerned about what happens to the fund. But I'm trying to dispel this notion that the reason that we are here to make these changes and to save the fund long term has to do with the fact that poor investment decisions have been made. That is not the case. Sir, I want to say further that when it comes to the financial sustainability of the National Insurance Fund, there are only so many things you can adjust. There are only so many things that you can play with. And the document that was laid by the Honourable Member who led this debate references them as parameters. But really, those are just the things that make up the cost side So how much you spend on benefits and the income side, how much you get to be able to spend on benefits. There's certain parameters that you're dealing with. So you could adjust the contribution rate. You could give a smaller average new pension. You could start the pension later. You could make adjustments to the cost of living allowance or the cost of living adjustments, or you can increase the eligibility requirements. The survey that was completed by Barbadians, the town hall meetings that were attended by Barbadians, said certain things very clearly. One of those things was that people did not want to see the contribution rate touched. So I'm trying to say, sir, that you have certain levers. If you push one, you got to pull another. And the consultation was about what are the levers that Barbadians feel comfortable with having pulled or pushed. The trick or the issue with the contribution rate, what people are paying in and what employers are paying in, is that that hits your income today. Let me tell you what I mean. You are earning money, earning a salary, employees are contributing, and employers are contributing. One of the reasons most countries, most states, most economists, most governments, most people opt not to hit the contribution rate is that that's affecting your disposable income today. That's affecting what you as an employee are earning and taking home and able to spend on food and clothing and school clothes. And for the employer, it's also affecting what they can invest in their staff, in their systems, and so on. So it's affecting you today. And so it is right for Barbadians to say that they didn't want to address the contribution rate. But what I'm saying is, in simple language, if we agree that we want to save the national insurance scheme, we want to keep it sustainable for ourselves and our children. If we agree that we don't want the retirement age to go above 70, which was what we heard. People said, what, 70? Absolutely not. If we agree that we don't want to touch the value of benefits, what is the pension that people are getting? We agree that we don't want to touch that. We have to touch something. And it seems to me that what this government opted to do was to touch as few things, as little as possible, and still be able to address the sustainability, the financial sustainability and viability of the fund going forward. Sir, I think it is important as well to be able to understand what are the principles that guided this reform. And I think that the core group and the working group and the advisory group were driven by certain objectives in the recommendations that they made, reiterating that the cabinet is always, the government is always at liberty to accept or not accept recommendations. But there were certain objectives. One, as the honorable member said, was the benefit adequacy, to make sure that the old age contributory pension met a defined portion of the basic needs of an elderly resident of Barbados. So, sir, this is not witchcraft. This is not putting your finger in the air and seeing which way the wind is blowing. This is thinking through, all right, the average elderly person who is relying on a pension, how much do they have to spend to survive? And what percentage of that can and should an old age pension be able to deliver? The truth is that a pension cannot deliver everything to that individual. And that is why one looks forward to hearing from the honourable member for St. Michael South, who will perhaps help us understand better what is this ecosystem of social protection? What does that look like? Because the National Insurance Fund exists in an ecosystem of social protection. It is one of the tools at the disposal of the state to protect people, but it is not the only tool. It cannot be everything to everyone. This government, this state, invests heavily in education expenditure, invests heavily in health care, and perhaps one of the things that we have to consider carefully is what is the balance of those investments between NIS, between the Welfare Department, between the National Assistance Board, between the QEH and the healthcare system, and the education system, and all the other benefits. How do those things work together to deliver for people what they need? Because with the best will in the world, on this planet or any other planet, a national insurance scheme or fund cannot deliver for a person who is at pensionable age all of the things that they need. That pension cannot deliver that. Not 100% of all the things that they want to do in those later years of life. So benefit adequacy. The affordability of contributions, important, I just spoke about that, and the sustainability of the fund. So the idea was that given future economic and demographic uncertainty, how do you protect the NIS reserves to meet future obligations? But, sir, for me, more important than these objectives are the principles that guided the considerations being made here. And I can only speak to the principles that guided the group that worked on this. I don't pretend to say or to ascribe these principles to the recommendations that were eventually taken, but I would be surprised if they were not the principles guiding the cabinet in these matters, because these are the principles that guide this government. The idea of not just doing no harm, but of making sure that we can go as far as we can to protect people, and not just protect people, to give them the best deal. Because the two things are different. This is not just about stopping people from drowning, you know, which in most countries is as far as they go. This is about designing a system that gives people their best shot at using their own productive capacity, giving people their best shot. So what were those principles? The idea was that the NIS would provide all qualified beneficiaries with a minimum pension that never falls below the poverty line. That never falls below the poverty line. The minimum pension right now is about 125% of the poverty line. And if you look around at different countries, their minimum pension is hovering somewhere around the poverty line or below. So other countries have already understood that their pension is really a contribution to people's survival. In Barbados, that the pension that is set is more than a contribution to people's survival. There's actually 125% of the poverty line now. I am not saying that the poverty line is where we aspire to have people. That is not at all what I'm saying. I am saying that there has to be a social floor that you agree ideologically that you do not want people to fall below. Barbados has one of the highest minimum pensions of countries that have national insurance schemes that are structured in this way. We consider that the minimum pension as a percentage of wages is relatively high. I know that there are some people hearing me who are thinking, you could say, well, you could talk chalk, but it's a question of what I can buy when I go in the supermarket. I agree. But what I'm saying, if we agree that the national insurance scheme cannot by itself provide everything, that we rely on the other social protection systems, we rely on the other social investments of the government, then this principle of making sure that the minimum pension, the minimum that you can get, never goes below the poverty line is a sound principle. The other principle that the group sought to work with is the idea that any future reforms must result in the NIS being financially sustainable for 25 to 30 years and reserves not falling below 2 times annual expenditure. And let me just say simply what that means. The Honourable Member for St. Peter was very resolute and clear on the idea that we cannot and should not responsibly as a government take reforms that we know we're going to have to revisit in 10 years. I feel strongly about this, sir, because I feel that uncertainty creates anxiety. And anxiety is a pre-existing condition for a lot of health concerns. What do I mean by that? I don't believe in making people frightened unnecessarily. If you have to bring reforms that are going to make the National Insurance Fund sustainable, make your timeline 25, 30 years. Don't tinker. Don't come back in 3 years because you was frightened to take this decision today. Don't come back in 5 years. Don't leave it for the next generation of those who will come to political service to scratch their head and think about what to do. If you have the wherewithal to bring about far-reaching reforms that are going to really affect sustainability, do it now. And that was the principle on which we were operating. The other principle, sir, is that the National Insurance and Social Security Act should include specific target funding levels and required actions to be taken if the actuarial projection suggests that the NIS will not meet stated targets. And this was covered in the presentation by the member who led the debate. Is simply this. The document that he laid references it as something called a compulsory adjustment mechanism. What does that mean? It means that the government of the day, today, in 5 years, in 20 years, will not have the option to cross their arms and wait for the next government to do it. What does the young people say? Get somebody else to do it? You put in the legislation something that binds the state to act. Now, I would say that I would have loved it to be a bit more automatic. I would have loved it to be that when the reserve expenditure ratio, when the balance of what the fund has and what the fund has to spend gets to an unsustainable level, immediately, I ain't coming to the minister, immediately action is taken. That is what I would prefer. I understand why the recommendation is framed as it is, because I don't think there's a more uncertain time, there has been a more uncertain time, sir, now than there is today. So one doesn't know what the government at the time will have to deal with or spend on or consider. So one has to, I imagine is the reasoning of the government, maintain the capacity of the minister responsible to take a decision, to say, well, I want to adjust this and not that. I want to adjust that and not this. But the truth is that something that is more automatic would actually perhaps give people a bit more comfort. Why did we think that this kind of compulsory adjustment mechanism was needed? Because, sir, when we started these conversations with the people of Barbados, there was a concern that you are paying in NIS contributions and somebody could decide to take a poor decision and put your future at risk. It is a valid concern. That has not far and wide been the history of the fund, except for the anomaly, I like to call it that I spoke to earlier. But we understand that people felt helpless. Like, I put my money in there and I don't know what's happening. And so a lot of what you heard from the Honourable Member for St. Peter about the composition of the investment committee, the professionalization of investment decisions, go to that concern. But further, this adjustment mechanism that says, look, I am not leaving it to any decision later down the road. This act is compelling the state to take certain decisions. Within 6 weeks, the minister has to come and say to the people of Barbados, what are you going to do about the fact that the fund is not performing at target? And satisfy the people of Barbados that something is being done. Because we have to remove the sense of worry from people's minds. This sense of worry, look, people could have enough to worry about in your day-to-day life. And what this measure does is to be able to remove that sense that people are not certain about what is happening with the fund once monies are paid in. But sir, I want to come to this idea of what the NIS is and is not. And I mentioned earlier that it is not a private pension. And I really have to address this issue because I think, sir, that there is a bit of tension with the role of private pension and what people understand private pension to do. The NIS for higher income earners, for example, is one of the pillars. But people who earn in the higher income bracket are at liberty to make other kinds of individualized pension investments. I know that there are those who think, for example, that there are things that the government can do to ease the pressure on the NIS with respect to private pensions. So, for example, the returning tax concessions for retirement savings is one thing that people have been concerned about. And it is something that is certainly within the purview of the state to do if the revenue numbers bear that out. But I want us to understand that the NIS is not here to be a private pension for people who are earning at a higher level. That's not what it's for. The NIS system is for people, the vast majority of Barbadians who are earning at a certain level, who are going to need that income in order to live or in order to contribute to the lives that they want to live and the choices that they want to make later in life. Sir, you know, in the couple hours since the ministerial statement was delivered and this debate started, there is discussion about what these measures mean. And I think that some of it comes from the fact that when we get to our feet in this chamber, sir, to share measures or to debate bills or to give perspectives, we cannot say everything. And so, because the honourable member mercifully did not take 10 hours to go through all of the things that obtain, there are questions. And there are things that were unsaid. There will always be things that are unsaid. And the board and the staff who have joined us today and who work every day will have to do the work of completing some of this. This is not the end. I really think that sometimes we believe, and when I say we, I mean Bajans. I'm a Bajan, here as a Bajan. Sometimes we believe that you only come when you have all the answers. And so we have this kind of whataboutism, right? And you say, well, what about this and what about that and what about that? And that's fine. It seems to me that government understands, the cabinet that is proposing these changes understands that when it comes to issues like retirement age, there are certain categories that may need an earlier retirement age. I think that has been the discussion. There are certain categories that already have an earlier retirement age. So there are certain kinds of work that are physically laborious. There are certain kinds of work that mentally, if you are not going to be as sharp, sorry, no, that doesn't apply to your discipline, but you're not going to be as sharp later in life as you were when you started out. And so there has to be consideration, and I am sure that the government understands this, and the minister understands this. There has to be consideration for those kinds of works. Soldiers, police officers, there are, somebody's trying to whisper in my ear, surgeons, but I do not believe that qualifies.
That's an aside, Honorable. That's an aside, Honorable. Pay no attention
And it will be
to
treated as such. So I think that the concern that people feel about, well, the work that I'm doing now that is so hard on my body, for me to do that for an extra year, what will that mean? And I think that, and I know the government is open to looking at those categories. There are some that say that there are categories of work that the retirement age should be later. And I won't get into that particular conversation now. But I know that there are people who say that there are groups of us who qualify for pension earlier and maybe should not. And there are groups of us who qualify for pension later and maybe should qualify earlier. And I am sure that there are things to be worked out in the details and in the administration of the Act and in the work that is done at the NIS itself to give life to these fears and to give life to these ideas. We could not in this debate contemplate and discuss everything that will be necessary. But the legislation gives us the wherewithal to start the work to make some of these things a reality. You heard about all of the things from that the self-employed, those who are self-employed will be able to do to make sure that they get their contributions paid in and they're able to benefit. But there's something else that I want to say. I agree, of course, with the measures that are meant to make it easier for the self-employed. I agree with the idea that you pay in benefits when you are in a position, pay in contributions when you're in a position to pay in contributions. You have seasonal work. You know, I go and dance in the hotels certain times of the year, high season for tourist season, or I sing during crop over, or I'm a promoter, and that is when I can pay in my contributions, and I want to make sure I can pay as I get money. But there's something else that I want to say. While we make it as easy as we can for those who are self-employed, I think that we also have to have an honest conversation. It benefits you, especially when you are self-employed, to make sure that you are able to have access to the National Insurance Scheme. There is no time that was clearer to us than during COVID. And I think that for many people, because of the way the scheme is structured and because the benefits did not match, because the benefits available to the self-employed were not aligned perfectly with what people who had contributions paid in on their behalf, because they did not align perfectly, there was this notion that, well, I can hold my money and if anything happened to me, I can have it. You could not pay in cash, in the cash that you are holding on to, by withholding NIS payment. You could not pay for the level of benefits that you would be getting out of the NIS system if you are paid up as a self-employed person. One does not say that just to be able to get revenue into the system. One says that because it hurts my heart to see people working hard every day who should be able to benefit from this system the same way the rest of us do. But because they have taken a decision based on not having all the information, they're not able to benefit. Sir, I have to say something here in general about this question of non-contributory pension and who qualifies and who doesn't qualify. I think it is something that, and I won't try to address it all, there are other members who will speak after me, but I think that the question of who qualifies for non-contributory pension and in general, how the NIS as an institution responds to people's concerns has occupied the minds of Barbadians. Sir, there are certain things that before the core group went anywhere to touch parameters or to make any kind of recommendations to the board, in the principle of fairness and equity, one of the first things that occupied those groups of people who were consulted was the issue of compliance. The consideration was that we cannot ask anybody to pay more, to retire later, to have fewer benefits until and unless the issue of compliance and recovery of monies owed to the NIS is addressed. And so whatever else is contemplated in terms of measures to be changed, I think the people of Barbados need to have the assurance, and I hear it from the honourable member, but I think we need to be able to see it after today, that everything that needs to be done will be done to recover what is owed, but also in an ongoing way to make sure that there is compliance of payment, because it is an unfair ask that you're missing some of the money over here, but then you're asking people who are already compliant to carry more of the burden. I know the member agrees with me that compliance has to be one of the first ports of call. Similarly, the issue of general administration and general performance of the institution is one that concerns Barbadians. The issue of responsiveness, and if I have a query, if I'm making an appeal, if I want something to be considered, who is managing my case? Who is responding? What are the benchmarks for the response time? What are the processes that are in place? I am reflecting to this honorable chamber the concerns of the people of St. Michael's South Central with respect to the National Insurance Scheme. And it makes no sense to adjust parameters and not to adjust service delivery. Now, this is not a challenge to the executive leadership and the staff of the NIS. This is a challenge to the minister and the board to give those who work there the wherewithal to be able to deliver on the things that we say we will deliver in this legislation. One of the things, for example, that I think is absolutely necessary is to be able to align the data sets and the systems at the Barbados Revenue Authority with those at the National Insurance Scheme. If I were to go further, I might make the recommendation that we have one institution in Barbados collecting all revenue. It is done in the US. It was recently in another jurisdiction that does not come to mind now, also done in another country, that determined that, look, we have compliance issues at the NIS. I guarantee you that the BRA has fewer compliance issues, but it's the same clients. It's the same clients. So if I want to see what is happening, what people are earning, and to make sure that the schedules that are submitted then match the contributions that are paid in, that is made easier when those data systems align. Now, I know that there's a concern about bifurcation of money is going to the consolidated fund and money is going to the NIS. That can be done. That can be done easily. That is an administrative issue, and I do not want that we fail to progress and we fail to put in systems that will serve the people of Barbados because we are afraid of the admin or because a piece of legislation says something. We are lawmakers in here, sir. We are in here now affecting legislative change. So if there's something that would benefit the people of Barbados that we can do, let us do it. Because we are already taking the courage needed to make some of these changes. So let us make the changes that are material to people. The government owes people money and the government is owed money. I'm saying that as plain as I can. For years we have said that we will use a system of offsets so that if you owe me a VAT return and I owe you NIS, we can, through a system of factoring, determine what is the net payment. Having a system that aligns BRA and NIS allows you to do that. If we are really looking for reform, let us really look for reform. And let us not allow the same systems that were set up 50 years ago that don't serve us today to stop us from going any further. That is certainly one of the things that may help people to feel that there's a more equitable system. Sir, the question of the double taxation of registered retirement savings plans is another thing that I know is on people's minds. And the issue is that you pay income, you pay from your income into a retirement plan, and your income is taxed when it goes in, and when you take money out of the retirement plan, it is taxed at the point of taking money out. Principles of taxation tell us that that ought not to be done. There's similar concerns, sir, about the taxing of pensions that are payable to people once they reach the age of the pensionable age. And the similar idea is that if my income is taxed at the time to which it is, some of it is used to contribute to my pension, why is it taxed again? And there is space, I think, to consider some of these things. I know, perhaps more than many, that government at all times is managing cash flow and managing revenue. Government has to spend on health, education, roads, myriad things. And so it is not always the opportune time to take a certain reform measure. I get that. But I think that we have to be driven by principles of fairness and equity and, quite frankly, sir, good common sense. I have to say as well, sir, that and I started to touch on this before, but I think there is a notion, and forgive me, sir, because I'm talking to all Barbadians today, and Barbadians are not a monolith. I'm talking to all Barbadians. I'm talking to those that are concerned about the issue of retirement age, talking to those that are concerned about the issue of compliance. But I'm also talking to those, sir, who have notions about the NIS and who seem not to support it as a system of social protection. And that is why I make the point over and over that the National Insurance Scheme is social insurance. It is not there for high-income earners to be able to do better with their income, and it is based on a system of solidarity. But there is a notion, sir, that the National Insurance Scheme non-contributory pensions are a burden to the fund. And we heard this clearly in the conversations that people had earlier. So in other words, There are those who would say we should not have a non-contributory pension, or we should have a lower minimum pension because if people didn't pay in, no matter what their circumstance, well, that's a matter for them. But that is not the Barbados that I was raised in. That is not the Barbados that created this scheme in the first place. This is not the Barbados that pioneered the suite of benefits that are available to Barbadians today. So I want to make it clear that in last year, sir, the NIS paid less than $8 million, or 16% of total non-contributory pensions. Non-contributory pensions, as the honorable member before me mentioned, this system is administered across the National Insurance Fund as well as government. So the fund last year paid 16% of the pensions that were paid. The non-contributory pensions are not a drag on the fund. But to be honest, sir, if it were more than 16%, I would have no problem with that. Because the idea of a non-contributory pension originated where? There are people who produce for this economy and this country. They do not get up in the morning and put on a jacket and go and sit down in anybody's office or in anybody's factory. They are raising children. They are taking care of the elderly. They are reproducing a workforce. They are doing volunteer work in communities. They are creating breakfast programs and going and feeding people's children at community centers and schools. They are productive. But our system says that we only see you and your productive efforts when you get a pay slip. The idea behind that non-contributory pension was that for those of us, at the time largely women, who were working within the household economy, because that's what a household is. It is an economy, it is an economic sector, it is a productive sector. That those people have an entitlement to be taken care of once they are no longer at an age where they can reasonably produce at the same levels. And that is the origin of that non-contributory pension. Women and others, increasingly now men as well, who work primarily in the home are not the only ones who should be considered, arguably, for a non-contributory pension. Now, I believe that the system of who qualifies for that may need to be relooked. We want to make sure that people are paying NIS contributions, but we similarly want to make sure that people who, for very good reasons, could not meet the number of contributions are not left outside of our system of social protection. Now, whether that is between a balance of non-contributory pension and other social protection systems in the Ministry of People Empowerment, we have to be clear and we have to understand that. But I want us to understand, and I'm speaking to those who believe that the National Insurance Fund should just be there to maximize their returns and not take care of people, that is not what it is for. Similarly, the idea that the NIS should be fully funded, that's not what it's for. It is not by design a fully funded system. And so we have to take the system as it was designed, which is with a social protection focus, to make sure that that is what it is used for. Sir, in my limited remaining time, I want to say two more things. One is that the honorable member for St. Peter was very clear in his explanation on and his understanding of the question of self-employment and the fact that it is not an employer who determines whether a person is self-employed. It's very clear what factors obtain that qualify somebody to occupy the status of self-employed and when a person is actually employed. All I will say in that regard is that the government has to always make sure it is leading by example on this matter. The government has to always make sure it is leading by example on this matter. And I know that the political will is there to do it, but sometimes when you look away and look back, the things that you believe obtain do not actually obtain. We have to make sure that there is no category of worker on the government payroll that is affected by this issue that the honorable member has outlined. The question of things like if you are required to show up for certain hours of the day at a certain place of work, and you have a set of duties that are assigned to you, that means that certain things come with that. That means that if I have to take a sick day, that I have to be compensated for that sick day. And I am not a labor lawyer or expert. I am just expressing the things that I understand. It means that I am entitled to vacation with pay. The people that we engage, we have to be careful that we do not, that the terms we set align with the category in which we have them. And that is all I will say on the question of who is self-employed and who is a contract worker and who must and should benefit from all of the things that we consider employed persons should benefit from. The other thing that I feel I have to mention, sir, is the question of semi-retirement. This idea that I have reached pensionable age or in the area of pensionable age, and I can still be productive. And there are many people who fit that category. Is there an option for me to take some pension and do some work within certain parameters? Sir, we have, I haven't seen the last census numbers yet, but we have a limited population, 275,000 people. And we just don't have the flexibility, we don't have the luxury of telling people that can still be productive, go home and sit down. We don't. We need to find frameworks in which people can work a couple days a week or a few hours and not jeopardize the income that they are due under a social insurance system. And as I said, I don't expect the member for St. Peter, the Honorable Prime Minister, the Vice Minister for Finance, I don't expect anybody to come in here with all the answers today. You know, I heard the Honorable Member for St. Michael West Central give some information about a proposed engagement to modernize the airport. And all of a sudden, notwithstanding the fact that there are things that are pending, all of the answers were demanded at one time. And I don't see how it is possible. I don't see how in a government that is this consultative, is either one or the other. Either you take the time and consult and ask questions and then get answers, or you come and say, and so it shall be. Which do we want? If we want consultation, let us get comfortable with not having the answers all at once. Now, Government must tell you what it is doing in your name when it is doing it. But if you have a government that comes to you and says, look, this is what we're thinking of doing, we are going to come back to you to get to understand everything and what you would have us do, then you can't have all the answers on day one as well. And I really would like to see us as Barbadians get into a place where we are comfortable enough with consultation, where we can suspend cynicism enough to really show up for conversation. As the people who attended the last Paris Speaks in St. Philip did. Showed up honestly and openly for real conversation. And look, the women and men in here can take a couple of lashes, you know. If you have to honestly come and say, well, I don't like this, that's what we're here for. But I think that we have to really understand the spirit of consultation. Sir, I mentioned that there are some 270,000 people, perhaps 280,000 here. It means that the same 270,000 people for whom we are transforming the country are the same 270,000 people who have to transform the country. I don't think sometimes that we understand that. The same people who are benefiting from or affected by policy decisions are the same people who have to be a party to those policy decisions. The same Director of Finance and Economic Affairs who is on every board. The same public officers who have to show up for every meeting and who have to do the transformation, sir. Barbados is small, and even with all of the talent that we have, it is one small group of people who have to do everything. That may sound like a very pedestrian point, but it's a fact. And sometimes I wonder whether we do not need to pause and say, look, education, reimagination, social insurance and social protection reform, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, are the things that we are prioritizing in the next 3 years. Pause. Figure out what are the details of execution. Execute those details. Take fresh stock, take fresh guard, and go again. I say that because when I review the document that has been laid by the Honorable Minister of Labour and Social Security, when I look at all of the things on this paper that I have not yet said but will not say, sir, today, when I consider all of the different permutations of a national insurance scheme, sir, the core group looked at so many options, not just for changing parameters, but for changing structure, for changing the very understanding of what a social insurance scheme is. There are so many things to do and to get right in this work. And this is so critical to get right. When it comes to investment policy and the funding policy, making sure that the compulsory adjustment mechanisms kick in when they need to. When it comes to risk and compliance, when it comes to corporate governance, when it comes to the parameters themselves, when it comes to making decisions about whether the old gentleman who must move around in a wheelchair because he's a double amputee and he didn't have enough contribution benefits, but at the time his application was denied, he was walking around, sir, like you and me, but now he does not. And now he has to get transportation to go into Bridgetown and sell greeting cards, which he does happily. Whether his...
That's one of your constituents, I don't remember, you know.
Well, if you say so, sir, I believe you.
That I know. I know him well.
But when it comes to decisions about that, how quickly are we responding to people? Do we have the systems in place to really have a fully professional, fully modernized way to answer people? Does it align with the social protection systems that the Honorable Member for St. Michael South is working on reforming as well? We have to make sure that these details are right. We have to make sure that the resources available to the people who have to make these decisions are right, and that there is no discretion in these decisions. That if I meet one officer today and I meet a different officer tomorrow, there is a principle guiding the answer that I get that will mean that it will be the same answer regardless of who is looking at the appeal or at the claim. These are the things, and so I really feel that the resources that we have to be deployed systematically, one after the other, to the things that we need to get done. Because we are in a reform space. We are in a reimagination space of everything. And you see, this is what happens when you now come to service in 2018 and have to start reimagining, because it wasn't happening before. And so everything is up in the air. Understood. But we have the resources that we have. We have the people that we have. We have the numbers that we have. And I'm not saying that we're only looking within our borders. Yes, we have resources from outside. But the people that have to buy in, are the same people that have to execute. And so I say, let us be systematic, and let us be deliberate, and let us be measured about what we choose to do when. And so those people who have to buy in, which is every Barbadian, I will finish where I started. And that is to say that the equity we're concerned with is not about individuals. Social insurance can never be about individuals. It is not just about equity between those people living with disabilities, equity between those in rural and urban areas, equity between women and men. It is not just about that equity, it's about equity between generations. There's nothing that we do today that should disadvantage those coming after us. And if we do not take these decisions today, we have nothing there as a safety net for those coming later. You know, most of us in here are starting to feel our mortality, sir. I know not you, but I know most of us are. And the more you feel your own mortality, the more you look at, I have a niece that's 9 years old, members in here have children. The more you look at them, the more you understand that the policy decisions you are making today are not about today. They are about leaving this country and this planet better off for you having been here. I am urging us to consider these measures in that context. I don't want to be one of those people that get old and start waving the stick and say, my day. But I am concerned about how individualized we have become. If it don't benefit me, I don't want to hear it. I wasn't raised that way, I have to say. I was raised to stand back and put other people in front. And that is what these measures aim to do. Sir, I commend these measures to this House. I want to assure the people of Barbados that this is not about what was the easy decision. If this government were here just to take easy decisions, we would not be in this place today looking to secure this fund for future generations. And for those that are alive today, who will be receiving a pension for some years to come. If we were only here to do the easy things, we would not be discussing this today. We would not be discussing education reimagination. I am happy that having read, 20 years ago now, oh my goodness, talk about feeling your own mortality. Having read 20 years ago now about how politicians only do things that can secure the vote in the next election, I am happy to be associated with a government that has the courage to say, you know what? This is bitter medicine, perhaps, that may not go down well, but there are other measures that we have taken and are taking that are able to hold people up. It is not just the NIS alone. It is all of the things that were done to increase pensions at the beginning. It is all the things that were done to be able to make sure that welfare was increased. It is all the things that the member for St. Michael South is doing now to make sure that the National Assistance Board and all of those things that offer social protection to Barbadians are also kicking in. This is an ecosystem of social protection. It's not just about National Insurance Fund. This is about all of us. And I encourage all of us to be concerned about what happens to future generations and to be able to give this our support. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill and I'm obliged to you.